practices. We're all being told that we ought to be incorporating more of the evidence-based teaching practices. Over the past decade or two, there's been tremendous research illustrating what types of things we can be doing in our classrooms to improve student outcomes, but actually determining whether faculty are using these evidence-based practices is challenging, because the types of measurements that are being used at the moment to evaluate teaching don't incorporate many of the actual activities that are going on in the classroom and outside of the classroom that are part of the teaching process. Currently, for most faculty, the only data collected are course evaluations in which you gain a student perspective. And that perspective is valuable, but it does have limitations. It's all from the student's perspective, and so if, for example, students don't like group work or group project assignments, does that mean you shouldn't be doing group assignments or group projects, even if research illustrates that students do obtain learning benefits from doing so? In addition, if the students indicate on your course evaluations that your exams are too hard, your assessments are too difficult, that information in and of itself doesn't tell you what you could be doing to help the students acquire those concepts better and perform better on your examinations. So those student evaluations don't necessarily tell you what you could be doing to improve your teaching. And in addition, they don't really tell you very much or tell other people very much about what's going on in your classroom, right? To what extent are you using activities? What percentage of course grades are based on homework versus examinations, and so forth. And so although student evaluations do provide some useful information, there are limitations in how you can use those to improve your teaching. The other common method for evaluating teaching is to use classroom observation protocols. These also have limitations in that to do them well requires extensive training on the part of the observers. There are some excellent protocols out there, but most of them take many hours of training for the observers, and then in order to get an accurate measurement of what's happening in the classroom, it requires sitting in on the class and using these protocols to evaluate the teaching for an extended period of time rather than just popping in once or twice over the course of the semester. So to get a broad overview, they're not really very practical. And so what we learned about at this conference was what's called the Teaching Practices Inventory. And this is a set of questions available online that evaluate teaching practices. And they were developed by a physicist named Carl Wieman. And he won the Nobel Prize in physics a number of years ago, but has really shifted his focus away from physics research to science teaching and science teaching research. And he developed this teaching practices inventory at a center at the University of British Columbia that's named for him, the Carl Wieman Science Education Initiative. And it was tested there over a period of years. It's been implemented there. He has since left the University of British Columbia and moved back to the United States and has been at several campuses out on the West Coast where he's also been implementing and refining this tool. It requires only about 10 or 15 minutes to complete online, so asking faculty to do this survey isn't asking a lot of them in terms of a time commitment. The online system will then calculate a score with points awarded for the use of evidence-based approaches. And so it's essentially a survey of what are you doing in your classroom, tick all the things that you're doing, and you get points awarded for things you're doing for which there's evidence that this is a useful approach for enhancing student outcomes. It includes teaching practices pertaining to both inside and outside of the classroom. So, and you'll get exposure to this in a minute, but so that it's, unlike the student evaluations, it's incorporating other things that you are engaging in that are important to effective teaching, but that aren't necessarily reflected in what you're doing during that 50-minute class period. A limitation is that the way it's been developed, it's intended for lecture-style courses. So the questions themselves are not applicable to a seminar course or to a lab. It was designed with STEM courses specifically in mind, but it would also be useful in many social science courses and social science departments. And there are some social science departments that have used it to get a measure of their teaching activities. I think one of the most useful characteristics of this approach is for collecting broad data about teaching practices. So, for example, at a department level. Necessarily, when this is only a 10 or 15-minute survey, it's not going to go into the level of depth of someone sitting in your classroom for multiple class sessions and analyzing more closely how you're interacting with the students and so forth. But this is a good way to get a broad overview of what faculty and departments are doing and to what extent are they adopting these evidence-based approaches. The questions fall into 8 categories, and this is a table from the paper that's been published about this protocol, and I'm happy to share the reference there with anybody afterwards who wants to read the scientific paper. But the categories are course information provided to the students, so learning goals or learning outcomes, supporting materials that you might provide to students to help enhance their learning experience in the classroom, in-class features and activities, so what are you actually doing, how are you spending your time in the classroom, to what extent are you getting feedback within the classroom from the students, assignments, are you using graded assignments, feedback and testing, feedback to the students and from the students, both about the course from their perspective and also what kind of feedback are they getting about their understanding of the course material. Another category including diagnostics, pre-post testing, and so forth. Training and guidance of TAs for courses that use TAs. You're not penalized if you don't use TAs, but for courses that do use TAs, you can get points for training and guidance of TAs. And then collaboration or sharing in teaching. So to what extent are you engaging with other faculty in your department or other departments in talking about what you're teaching and sharing course materials and so forth. So this is what I mean by saying that it incorporates both in-class material as well as things that contribute to your teaching but that are not necessarily captured by somebody sitting in the classroom. The scoring system is based quite simply on assigning a point for each thing that you're doing that there's evidence that this is beneficial in the classroom. Most things are worth 1 point. Some things that have been identified as being of greater significance to student outcomes, you'll get 2 or potentially 3 points for indicating you're doing that in your class. And there's 67 points possible overall, but they make clear in their paper that they don't expect anybody to be doing all of the things that are on their list. It's simply not possible. You don't have time to incorporate all of these activities, but there are lots of different things that you can be doing, that you can be pulling in to your teaching practices to improve student outcomes. And so nobody gets a 67, and there's no expectation that anybody would get a 67. What they said at the conference was that a score above 40 was considered good, and so people should be shooting for a score above 40 if they're not above 40 to start with. There's 37 items worth a total of 47 points that are based on extensive and directly relevant evidence of educational benefits. So these are all items for which there is strong evidence in the science education literature that these are beneficial for student outcomes. There's 10 items that have more limited evidence, mid-course feedback, TA training, project assignment, for which there is some evidence in the science education literature that these are useful practices to engage in, but the evidence isn't as strong as in this category. And then there's a few items on measuring learning. These are things for which people have assumed, based on logic, that these are useful things to do in the classroom, but for which there really isn't any evidence yet. Nobody has actually tested these, but this accounts for only 4 items on the survey. So what we're going to have you do now is go to your laptops if you brought one. I have several extra ones here. And this is the website that you'll want to call up down here. And when you do so, you'll get to a page that looks like this. And then here is what you click on to actually get to the survey. And it should only take about 10 or 15 minutes for everyone to complete it. As I said before, the intention is that this is for a lecture-based course or a lecture-style course rather than a lab or seminar. If you haven't taught a course that would fall into that lecture-based category, you could perhaps think about a course you took as an undergraduate and fill out the survey based on your memories of what happened in that class, at least from the perspective of a student. Or you could think about a course that you might be planning to teach in the future and think about how you would fill out the survey questions based on what you would incorporate into that course. But we'll give you a bit of time to work through this, and then Dorina is going to take us all through the results. The histograms? I'll talk about the histograms. The question is whether it works on other devices. I haven't tried it on a phone. You couldn't.
Okay.
Does anybody else want to borrow a laptop? Okay. Yeah, it's just a Qualtrics, I think, survey. Do you guys want another one?
Oh, sure. I took it, actually.
Oh, okay. Anybody else? We have another one. And if anybody does have any technical problems, let us know. It's helpful for us to know if there's limitations on what systems it works on and so forth. And we won't be asking anybody to reveal their scores. So the expectation is that you're doing this for your own benefit, and so you'll be true as you answer the questions. Sorry? That's right. That's right. Sorry, I should have printed it bigger. I think we're going to look through all of theirs. Is that going to be too much time? I think we have plenty of time.
Anybody who finished? If you want to save it, you can just print it as a PDF file. So if you want to save it and look at it from your web browser, you can just say print. And then you have it there. And save as or print PDF. Which one is forward? We'll wait for more people to finish. We have time. Anybody wants more pizza? I can bring you some pizza in the meantime. No? You're far away from the pizza, no? Nobody wants a slice, no? Raise your hand if you haven't finished. Mira? She came late. She hasn't finished. Come on. Well, if everybody finished, then we can keep going, and Mira can have fun finishing it too. So as you can see, there were a lot of questions in there. When you got your final score, what was your feeling? How did you do? Okay, were you happy with your score? Because when I got my score, I thought I'm doing more than I actually do. Well, first of all, I haven't read the article properly, so I didn't know that I'm not supposed to get 100%. But I got something about 42, and that was really truthful, you know. And I thought, I'm doing great. And I'm doing okay, let's say that. But what I wanted to show you here is what you have seen when you submitted the survey is the fact that not every single question is 1 point. Sometimes one question, one answer that you select may count more than 2 points. In general, it's 1 point. So your score doesn't vary so much by missing 1 point here and there or by adding a point here and there, because we can sometimes be subjective about what we are doing in class. This is the one where you can see I have actually went through twice, and I said, okay, there are instructor TA meetings, which there are not, because we have a TA meeting, or at least I don't have instructor TA's meetings every single week. And I added this one, and the score went up by 2 points. So there are some, and they're easy to identify if you really want to, just to see how you can improve your score in this one. The study conducted by Carl Wieman included several departments, and what you see here are the results from 5 different departments. Departments 3 and 4 are departments where about 90% of the faculty actually filled out the survey, and many of them were involved in this science, what was it called? The improvement of teaching, let me call it that way. And as you can see, you can identify based on the score how many of the courses for which this information was provided have an ETP score of 50, and that's about 3 of them. And how many have a score of 15? That's about 3 of them. So those are doing really poorly in terms of overall teaching practices. So this is nice for the department if you look at the department and say, okay, I have more than half of the courses doing really well. But you want to look at the results either as a department or personally. And if you look personally at all of them, you may want to build a table like this where, again, if there are several people that you work with closely in the department that are also interested in teaching practices, you can all put together a table like this after taking the survey and go, okay, I am interested in seeing which one of my faculties is really good in doing collaboration work. And you can see that this particular course has a high score for that collaboration. So you can go to that person and say, what are you doing? How are you implementing collaboration in your course? So it allows you to identify people in the department that can help you improve your teaching practices. This is a graph that shows you how the distribution of the ETP scores actually changed for the Department 3 in the study that Carl Wyman conducted after they implemented all the educational reforms that they wanted. And you see how the number of courses that have a higher ETP score actually increased drastically in several years from 2007 to 2013. It's not something that happened overnight, obviously. So what is this tool good for? It is good for yourself, for the instructors, because first of all, when you went through all that survey, you saw what are the teaching practices that have research that shows that helps the students learn better. So even if you're not aware of some of them, by going through the survey, you become aware of them. So it helps you identify those practices, as well as helps you identify practices that you're not using. Actually, that's even more useful because you may not have been aware of one of them. So from the scores, you get that. You also learn how to improve teaching, and you can document your teaching practices. You know, we are always asked to prove that we have done better every single year. Well, this is an instrument that is recognized as being valid, and you can simply use it, and from year to year, being honest in using it, see how your scores improve, and not the overall score, but the score for each one of the categories. That's where you can show improvement. And it can help you, and it is a way of adding information to the evaluations that the students give you every single semester. You can compare your own results with those of other colleagues in your department or in other departments that teach science. And you can identify what's weak, what's strong, compare, contrast, learn from each other. Also, by looking at all that list of things that they ask you to do, you can identify which one are the easiest to adapt and implement those before you go and try to implement the ones that are more difficult. And basically, this tool allows you to quantify research-based practices for merit or promotion. If teaching is part of the criteria on which you are evaluated, then you may want to include the results of this tool in your file. For the department, so if you're a department chair and every single year you're asked to provide what is called a summary of how your teaching, how the department is doing in teaching and how teaching has improved, you really don't have any tools to say that is improved. You can say a few things. You can say that the evaluations increase, but you don't really know why the evaluations are better. This is a tool for the department also to show how teaching has improved in the department, if it has improved. It benchmarks the quality of the teaching done in the department. It allows the department to identify what are the teaching practices that are not used, what are the ones that are used the most, where can be improved, what are the categories that actually need improvement. And not only that, but you can use this data not only as a department but as a college, for example, College of Engineering, who is teaching STEM type of courses for institutional review or for accreditation. Over time, if you do this every semester, over several years, you can actually track if there was any improvement in the teaching practices of a particular faculty or of a particular course. So that is helpful for the department. Now, you can also compare the quality of teaching done in this department, in this university, with the teaching done at other universities or peer institutions, if, of course, if they are doing the same survey. And this is a tool that can also be used for students if we want to make it available, if we want to make available the results. I mean, if you think from a student point of view, whenever you select courses, you want to make sure that you're selecting a course where you're going to learn something. Now, how do you know that? It's word of mouth for now, or students have access to the course evaluations for the particular instructor that teaches that course that semester. And you know very well that based on the reputation and the evaluation, some students will take the course, some students will not take the course. There are courses that use collaborative work. Some students absolutely hate that. Well, that may force them to actually change their major because they really don't want to take that course. So these results, the congregation of these results will also allow students to make informed decisions much better than just based on what other students are saying. Actually, I said all that, yeah. The deal is how to collect the data. Who should be in charge of this data? Should be the department, should be the college, should be the university, who should be in charge of enforcing this? I mean, as you can see, this is an instrument that you can fake if you want. But when you put in the information, you try to be as truthful as possible if you really want to get meaningful results back and learn from it. In order for us not to be afraid in using it and being truthful when we fill out the information, there should be no stakes tied to the score that you get. And if you really want to see how teaching is improving at the university, then this should be done sooner rather than later. The AAU conference that Sarah and I went to, this was the major topic for that conference. So all the departments, not all the universities that participated at that conference, were trying to come up with a way of measuring the teaching effectiveness of their instructors in their departments. And this was a tool that was considered as being acceptable. There was no decision, but this is where AAU is going towards. They really want to be able to measure what is going on at the universities that are part of AAU. So, discussion, would it be beneficial and how should be done? I'm just going to leave it open to all of you. Yes?
So, I think the obvious question that I have is, this is really, and I really like this, and I'm going to use this, for myself, and for PMT and all that other stuff. But I know that I'm a fairly honest person, and I also know that there's people happens in my department who, once they learned which ones were correct and which ones weren't, will just give it. So, I get the no stakes time to it, because I think that's important. If I took this time to come in and said, I think this is a great idea for our ABET, for our accreditation, and it would really show continuous improvement of our curriculum, and it would be such an easy way to do it, how do I guarantee that my faculty are actually filling it out honestly? Like, do I need to have someone else fill it out for them?
I think that there's no guarantee, but they did test this when they were developing it at the University of British Columbia, and the way that they tested it was by having observers go in and who were trained to evaluate what was going on in the classroom, and so they spend a long time in the classroom validating that what the professor said he or she was doing in the classroom was really what they were doing, and also evaluated all the other teaching materials. And one thing that they found was that they were largely in agreement with each other, what the observer said and what the faculty member said. The places where there's some level of ambiguity, there were two places. One is just how many times in a class period do you stop and ask, are there questions? And so that was one where it was difficult for faculty to accurately remember how often they do that on average. The other more significant one was what proportion of time do you spend lecturing? But even with that one, the difference between what the professor said and what the observer said was generally within 20%, and it was evenly divided between whether the professor over or underestimated how much time he or she spent lecturing. So at least in their testing of it, faculty did appear to largely make an earnest effort to be honest. Yeah. And I think that's why it needs to be emphasized that there's no stakes. These can't be used to decide who's going to get awards, who's going to get penalized. And you could even, depending on how you want to use the data, you could even make the guarantee that this is only going to be used at the departmental level to evaluate what's happening in our department over time, as opposed to saying, well, this person clearly needs work on incorporating more activities into the classroom and so forth. So I think it comes down to how you present it to the faculty.
I also think it shouldn't be the only tool that you are using. So you have to combine it, take the evaluations into consideration, have another faculty sit in one of the lectures or classes, and combining all of them will be clear if somebody's honest or not.
So Weeman actually did a study that was in PNAS last year where they took, I believe it was a physics class at Stanford, and incorporated the practices in one and did the other in another, and then tested them both on a concept inventory or something like that. And the results were quite spectacular.
Are you talking about the famous study that was reading from?
No, this one seemed longer.
Because that is a very questionable study.
Let's see here.
I'm questioning it. And
No, this was in PNAS.
okay.
And, yeah, okay, so it is, last year, I believe, or earlier this year, page 8319, volume 111, large-scale comparison, no, this isn't the paper.
But what was his comparison? It was a section where
It was a section that taught by a traditional way, a section the results were really quite substantial. And it seems to me it was not a 3-week study. It was much longer than that.
Well, the University of they have been running these studies for a long time. Carl Wieman was there when they started doing all this work. And then he moved to British Columbia, and then he came back to Stanford. So Colorado University has quite a few of these studies where they show the students improved their understanding of physics by using all active learning techniques and so on.
Other questions or comments? So when Dorina and I got back from the conference, we talked about, well, if we want to do this on campus, how would we implement this? And it seems like this is the type of thing that if we did have a teaching and learning center, it's the type of data that they would be very helpful to collect or to work with departments to collect. And given the current budget situation, I'm assuming that our teaching and learning center is probably on hold for quite some time. So we sent the information about it to E.T. at Mo, who seems to be fulfilling many of the roles of a teaching and learning center. But our impression is that they're overwhelmed to some extent with the number of responsibilities that they've been handed in the absence of a teaching and learning center. And so we haven't had a response yet about what they might do to help implement this. But so I'm curious both whether you think this is a useful thing to do and also how you think we might go about doing this if we do want to.
We proposed to give a presentation, but we were sort of turned down.
Well, we wanted to do a workshop, and the
It's true.
workshops
We
were
wanted to do,
full, and then...
Besides this tool, Sarah mentioned another, what's that called? Another way of evaluating teaching effectiveness, and that is called COPUS, C-O-P-U-S. But in order to use that tool, you really need to get trained.
And that would have taken about 2-3 hours to get the training. So that's why we proposed the workshop. And in a way, I think that is something that faculty would be much more comfortable with, because it's less subjective. You have somebody else who will repeatedly come to your class and look at what you're doing and score, and then this one where you're the only one who reports it.
But we have thought of doing just this for, not for a workshop, but for one of the regular sections at Celebration of Teaching. But we were concerned that it is heavily focused on STEM, and is that too narrow at Celebration of Teaching? Would we get very many people?
Yeah.
So then when we got asked to do something here, we thought, well, we'll present it here and see the reaction, and then if people like it, we'll do it at Celebration of Teaching next year. But any other thoughts on how to get this implemented? And that might get people interested in it. It might get people to know about it on campus, but that doesn't necessarily get it implemented on campus.
Let me put the question in a different, would you like to see it implemented at the campus level?
Program assessments, right? So if those from above require this to be done as part of that program assessment, that would be something.
And it's got a number so it's a demon, they can.
That's right.
We were told the same thing, that we need to provide them with program assessment that has more numbers in it.
Right.
Well, what do I have? What tool do I have to provide you with a number?
Other than just making something up.
Exactly.
So I will bring this to my department, regardless of, honesty or otherwise, because that is something that we have problems with every single year with ABET, is we have to show for our accreditation that we have continuous learning improvement or continuous curriculum improvement. And so like every year we have this whole faculty meeting discussion of, oh crap, what have we done this year to like try to make anything better in the department? And everyone just kind of spins their wheels, and we try to create this Excel sheet where it's all very qualitative, and we're like, well, I attended a conference and there was a talk on teaching, and I mentored some undergrads, and we're all sitting here going like, what actually counts? But it would be like, this is nice because it's quantitative, right? It has numbers, and we can just plug it into our feedback model and get stuff out like that. That'll be so much easier to use than what we're currently doing.
And it's a validated study.
Yeah.
So it's not only that somebody came up with it, there's a lot of research done to it, and
I think it's also maybe it's an efficient way to educate people about what these best practices are. So even if they might not be honest, at least then they know these are things I should be doing, right?
exactly.
So by having them take it every year, they learn it. Yeah.
Well,
I
that
mean,
was...
I think there's a lot of people that just don't know. Just don't know what best, and they don't have time to be reading the papers and figuring it out. But if you're doing this, it's a really efficient, quick way to just say, hey, these are some simple things. Some of them simpler than others.
Well, even if you know, I think it's also just a nice reminder, because when I was taking it, there were things on the list that I was not ticking, and that I thought, yeah, I know, I really ought to be doing that. And that puts a little bit of pressure on me to add that in the next time I teach the course.
That I was doing, and I was like, oh, okay, well, that's good. It seemed like that was helpful. I didn't know that really was
To sort of address your concern, right, if you do it for several years, the grades should increase if this is working, right? If you're not an effective teacher, then you implement. No, but I'm saying you're measuring your own effective teaching capability.
But that doesn't mean that you're assessing the students appropriately, right? Like there's a big difference between what they're learning and how you're assessing them.
No, but to go back to what Frank said, he saw this study where they had a classroom which was using traditional lecturing techniques and a classroom that wasn't.
Meta-analysis of about 225 studies.
But in a lot of those studies, like, these are people who really understand, like, this is how best teaching is done, and they also understand this is how best assessment is done. And so they are linking their assessment with their actual teaching practices. And so inherently, they already have these assessments that are done really well and that are really well linked to learning objectives and teaching practices. Whereas, like, I had no idea until 2 years ago that there was this whole research area on assessment practices, and that my assessment was not at all aligned with what I was trying to teach my students. And so I went back and redid it. Turns out all of my grades went up because I was actually assessing the things that I wanted them to actually learn. And so it's not necessarily like a grade thing, right? Unless their assessments absolutely are aligned. So.
But that's the point, right? I mean, you're supposed to be aligning your assessments with your learning objectives.
But this isn't teaching. This is not an assessment tool. It's not
It's an
assessing your
assessment
assessments.
of your own teaching stuff.
No, but it's not. This tool does not assess your assessments of the student's learning.
This does not.
Right, no, I understand that, but I mean, they're correlated,
Right.
are they not?
I don't think they are.
They don't have to be, unfortunately. So the way you do it in physics, there are quite a few tests that have been developed and validated, that there are tests properly designed. So you can use those at the beginning, at the end of the semester, and they're not part of the grade, and see how the students' understanding of the material has increased. And that's something that you can tie to this. Because those are independent, at least for the physics. Mm-hmm. Yes.
But when that person is going to cheat, you have to go back and say, did they actually do those pre and post assessments?
Well, that's what I'm saying, you
And
have
they
to,
may
as
not.
part of, no, but as part of the requirement of incorporating this into your departmental teaching, quality, then you'd have to incorporate those pre and post assessment.
Right, you would have to.
Yeah.
And then
That's
you would
the
have a
point.
whole bunch of other work to do, and you'd have whole discussions on whether or not, like, then there would be acrimony in the department about, oh, you're evaluating things, and, like, there's a lot of politics in there on reading it, like having faculty within your department assessing you and how you're doing, and it's just, there's other stuff going on there that you have to be careful of.
I mean, just to end it, the last thing you said was as a student, which is not a graded, so the student takes some pre-assessment, then some post-assessment. So I'm not clear how there would be acrimony with that. But.
You can't force a faculty to have the students take a pre and post test. And there's always the fear that if the post test doesn't show a high enough increase in understanding, the instructor will be held accountable. So it's really up to the instructor. But I think that from my point of view, I would like to present this tool as something that you personally can use and look at it on how you can improve your own learning. And if you have friends, talk to them about the tool and see if they are willing to use it and see if they want to improve their learning. And you can discuss. And I think this is how things will slowly grow once more and more people become aware of this tool that can help you evaluate your own teaching, not how well the students are doing on an exam. I'm teaching the same way, and I can write an exam where everybody gets a very high grade, or I can write the same exam, and they should know how to do both, and still the average is going to be pretty low. So.
Well, I feel like a minion here because I'm a TA. And it's actually because I'm a TA, I got to teach the same course for several professors. So I get to see different teaching practices, and sometimes some of them don't work. But as a TA, it's really hard to bring that up to the professor and say, hey, this doesn't really work. Could you change that to be like the way the other guy was doing it? That doesn't really work very well. So I think this kind of survey is actually going to be very good in facilitating like discussion among people who teach the same course, so that people get to see what they can do to improve their course and how they are doing maybe compared to the average, and how they can get better at that.
Thanks, everyone. The winner of our book is Nilay Muslo.
That's my interpretation of it. And that was interesting for me because when I was taking the test for the first time, there were things that I thought, there's a reason I don't do that. That's a bad thing. I don't think you should do that. And I didn't understand when I was taking it that these weren't all things that were regarded as good practices and that I would get points for. And so that was revealing to me when I looked at this and saw that, that you don't get credit for everything you're doing that's on the list.
I thought it was interesting that apparently TAs are a bad thing.
Well, in the paper, he addresses this and explains it's not that TAs are either a good or bad thing. If you don't have TAs, you automatically get 3 points in order to equilibrate what's available. But your scores might end up being a little bit different if you have TAs versus you don't, depending on what you're doing with your TAs. So they're not passing any value judgment on whether you have TAs or not. But if you have TAs, there are things that you could be doing to facilitate good teaching by TAs.
I didn't know TA was equivalent to saying, okay, since you're the only one in charge of the course, you know then what is happening. You don't have to have meetings with the TAs in order to understand what's going on in the lab and the sections that they did themselves.
So then that is my question. So there's 7 points that you can receive, but I don't see how you can receive all 7 with any of this, because like, I don't have TAs because I don't pay for them.
You get 3 points for not having TAs.
Right, but then it's out of 7. So is there a way for this question to actually get all 7 points? And I think the answer is no. So that's strange to me that it's formatted that way.
Well, one thing that Dorina and I noticed just before we started here today, or actually while you were taking it, is that although the paper that we used to build the presentation says the maximum number of points is 67, the actual on your screen where you take it, it says 70. So clearly they have changed it a little bit since publishing the paper. And so it could be that number 3, which comes out of the paper, has been adjusted as they've tweaked the survey when they get more data.
No, I'm just curious, why would they put it out of 7? That there's no way for you to actually choose 7. Yeah. Right, like, it just doesn't make any
Well, why do you think you can't get 7? Because some of these can be worth more than 1 point.
I mean, those are 3 under 4 form.
Oh, the first one's treat, other, yes, if there was no TAs, you get 3 points.
But you only didn't get any of the rest of it.
Yeah, so clearly one of those is worth 2 points.
Maybe that's why that's scored.
Yeah. But the 3 points might be old data.